about agile institutions and agile organizations.
Yeah.
What does it actually mean? What are we talking about when we talk about agility in the university sector?
Well, it's hard because I've never experienced it. So I would love to say that it is, an ability to respond quickly to the environment that changes. And even just like, for example, I was in data analytics and it was that, we have geopolitical things happening with America or China. What data do we have? What work are we doing with them? And what's at risk here? And the ability to respond to that quickly. That is, from my perspective, what like agility would be operationally, right? Not just, speaking at that leadership level and that strategic level where you'd like to think that we could move the ship in a certain direction. And I think universities need to do that. But to me, agility is our ability to operationally mobilize to get that outcome.
Okay, so that takes me to, again, your experience. You've just left a university. What was your experience on the ground with change, with how agile was the institution you were at? Is it possible for big, large institutions to be agile?
Well, the perception is that small institutions should be more agile than larger institutions who are sort of embedded in their ways and have their processes. But I would argue that those smaller institutions have this weighed down by the same weight of compliance and risk aversion and operational legacy systems and processes that don't allow you to actually be agile. And so in my experience, when we were asked to be agile or sort of the perception was thrown that perhaps we should be more agile, it was kind of like, on what planet? We are just keeping the wheels on as it is, let alone making a huge change.
So you've just mentioned some of them, but I'm going to ask you to elaborate a little bit. What are some of the obstacles to change, or what are some of the blockers that stop a university, big or small, from being agile, from its capacity to change?
So in terms of infrastructure, that's one piece of the puzzle. Unless you invest heavily into the integration of systems and infrastructure so that things communicate and work together, that to me is a real blocker, because there's a perception that we have these systems in place, but when there's no cohesion and they don't speak to each other, that's really hard to be responsive and to move from an infrastructure perspective. So there's that. I think there's also legacy processes that have, people have built over the years that potentially weren't experts in process, but just it made sense for that human at that moment in time, and then we stick with that because that's what we did, and there's a real friction in terms of changing a process that kind of works rather than bravely embracing a new process that could work so much better, and even embracing new technology. So from an infrastructure perspective, there's a lot of friction. Again, and operationally it's probably in that bucket as well. But then equally there's silos of groups within a university, and there might be overlap with who's got responsibility for what. And so there's a disconnect between perhaps what the leadership thinks is possible, and then a disconnect between all of those operational groups working together to achieve that thing when there isn't clear boundaries around who does what. There's also the piece of the puzzle, which is the governance structure of a university, which is complex, when a decision needs to be made, it has to go into a maze of subcommittees, working groups, committees, even up to academic senate and then up to council to get an approval. That structure fundamentally restricts how agile you can be in terms of having an idea and making a decision on that idea. And then that doesn't even include the execution of that and actually moving. That's just, are we going to do this? So when you've got those heavy governance structures, that can add friction as well.
So many of the things you've mentioned seem to me to be intrinsic to organizations, to universities. Is it possible then for universities to be agile to respond to change? Is it something that we should aim for? And if so, what are some of the ways that we can move at least towards some kind of agility, a greater degree of agility?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a good question around, should we be more agile, and is that the purpose of a university? I think to a degree, yes. That I think any organisation, especially with how incredibly fast things are changing right now, that there needs to be an ability to respond to your environment and to what's happening in the world. But equally, we need to be able to preserve the essence of what a university is and what it does for our society and community. So preserving what's beautiful about a university, but then also embracing a new world and new change is sort of, I guess, a balance. The duality of that is beautiful in terms of being agile, because you don't want to be so agile that you move away from the fundamentals of what we're doing here and what the sector's designed to do. What a leader might do in terms of helping a small university or a large university be more agile, there's a couple of things. I would say addressing the concept of that governance structure and how long it takes for an idea to become a decision. So rather than entering a maze of committees to make a decision, that perhaps there's very clear boundaries around who is responsible for making these decisions and making them quickly. Even having sort of decision pods, and not with guardrails, so not that they're just out there risk-taking and not in the interest of the university, but just adults making adult decisions and off we go. Secondly, I would say embracing a bit of risk. So even embracing the culture that we need to try and fail at things. I think I would say that there's a tendency for perfectionism. That's my experience anyway in the sector. And if we embrace a little bit of failure and celebrate that, and the concept of fail fast and learn quickly and keep moving, I think there's validity in that it could allow a more agile ecosystem if you're willing to take a risk and push the boundaries a little bit. Because if we stay small and we continue on with what we're doing, we're embracing the dead weight, basically. So allowing your people to run these experiments and to learn what they need to learn and keep moving, I think that's the way to go. And thirdly, I would say deciding on what to say no to. So I just mentioned dead weight, and it feels like that, like processes that were great for 2009 and no longer work in this day and age, or reporting for the sake of reporting. There's a lot of things that happen operationally within a university that we could really just choose not to do. And with the right leadership to focus us on what we should be doing, I think that's the way to go.
So what I find really interesting about that is that you're talking both about decision making but also implementation. So there seem to be two bits of the puzzle that need addressing. So how we make decisions in the face of change, but then also how we implement those decisions considering the contexts or the structures the universities have. Is it just about better decisions and better implementation, or is there something else that is missing to make universities more agile?
I would say there's a real opportunity in terms of the culture of a university embracing that concept of failure. If we embrace that, people are going to step out a little bit further, and if that is rewarded in a way, I think that will be the biggest game changer in terms of agility, because you can do all of these things and still your people are afraid to move. And I think if you embed a culture that is, we celebrate that, then I think that will move the needle.
Okay, I will provocatively, I guess, ask you to talk a little bit more about that culture of failure and what it actually looks like on the ground, and whether universities can withstand a culture in which failure is accepted. Because I think you are correct in saying there's a degree of perfectionism in everything that is undertaken at unis, whether it be research activities, teaching and learning, surveys, talking to the media, whatever outreach activities, there's always this really high standard that has to be met, which makes sense to me. What does failure look like in that context?
Well, I think we shrink the experimental bucket to like 10% or something like that. Like, we need to have that beautiful high standard of output that is expected of a university. But what are the things that we're going to take a risk in? So I think that's actually a decision. What are we carving out here? Where are we going to take a risk? For me, what makes sense operationally, because all of that can exist, but if operationally we can move more seamlessly, then that's an amazing thing. Like, I was a professional staff, you were an academic staff. My job was to make your job easier. But operationally, it was very hard to do that. And it was clunky. And so if we can actually say, well, we're going to take risk here, we're going to change this one process, that's really clunky. The risk could just be, let's really think about this process and how smooth it can be, and step away from the legacy process. It could
what has been done, the way it's been
risky.
done. Yeah.
Like, in terms of risk, like, it doesn't have to be, throwing something right out there and really putting yourself out. It could just be as simple as embracing that type of risk, like incentivizing your people to find those experiments and to push the boundary and to fail and to learn and to go, no, this works now.
So now we have 3 really interesting ways in which we can make universities more agile, and that has to do with decision making, with implementing the decisions that are made, but also with changing the culture on the ground and how people are able to work and experiment within their remit.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up.
All right. Well, thank you, Willo.